Education in colonial America was strict, religious, and often reserved for the privileged. From hornbooks to secret schools, learning was far from today's classrooms. Get ready to uncover 25 surprising secrets of colonial American education. Number 25. Some schools had no buildings. Many colonial schools had no official buildings. Instead, classes were held in homes, churches, or even barns. Some students learned outdoors when the weather allowed. In winter, lessons were often cut short because of the bitter cold, as many schools lacked proper heating. Number 24. Students used a single book for all subjects. Most colonial children didn't have different textbooks for different subjects. Instead, they relied on a single book, usually the New England Primer or the Bible. These books covered reading, writing, basic arithmetic, and religious teachings, making them the foundation of early American education. Number 23. There were no grades or standardized tests. Students weren't divided by grade levels the way they are today. Instead, they were grouped by ability, meaning classrooms often had students of all ages learning together. Progress was determined by how well a student mastered reading, writing, and arithmetic, rather than by passing formal exams. Number 22. Punishments could be public and humiliating. Harsh discipline wasn't just physical. Public humiliation was common. Students who misbehaved might have to wear signs reading "Idle Boy" or sit on a stool with a dunce cap in front of the class. These punishments were designed to shame students into behaving and working harder. Number 21. Some schools only lasted a few months a year. Colonial schools weren't open year-round. In many areas, classes were only held for a few months, often during the winter when children weren't needed for farm work. This meant many students received only a few years of formal education before they had to focus on work and survival. Number 20. The alphabet was learned with religious rhyme. In colonial America, learning the alphabet wasn't just about letters. It was a moral lesson. The most famous tool for this was the New England Primer, which paired each letter with a religious phrase or rhyme. For example, A. In Adam's fall, we sinned all. This method ensured that children were not just learning to read, but also absorbing religious doctrine from their very first lessons. Number 19. Girls were often taught at home. While boys had access to more formal schooling, many girls were expected to learn domestic skills instead. Mothers or older sisters would teach them basic reading and writing, but their education often stopped there. In wealthier families, girls might learn embroidery, music, or even French, but the idea of higher education for women was almost unheard of. Number 18. Hornbooks were the tablets of the time. Before notebooks and printed textbooks, students used hornbooks, a small wooden paddle with a sheet of paper covered by a thin layer of transparent horn. These contained the alphabet, numbers, and the Lord's Prayer, making them a staple in early American classrooms. They were durable and portable, but mastering them required patience and discipline. Number 17. Wealth determined education. Access to education in the colonies wasn't free, and the quality of schooling varied dramatically depending on social class. Wealthy families could afford private tutors or send their children to England for advanced studies. Middle-class children attended local schools, while poorer children often had no formal education at all, instead learning trades through apprenticeships. Number 16. Dame schools were the first American classrooms. For many young children, their first experience with formal education came from dame schools, small, informal schools run by women in their homes. These schools provided basic literacy and arithmetic skills, often using Bible passages as teaching material. While they lacked structure and resources, they were an important step toward widespread education in the colonies. Number 15. School days were short, but not for the reason you think. Unlike today's structured school hours, colonial children often attended school for only a few months of the year. However, this wasn't for summer vacation. It was because children were needed to help with farming and household chores. Education took a back seat to survival, especially in rural areas where every hand was needed during planting and harvest seasons. Number 14. The harsh discipline of early schools education in colonial America wasn't just strict, it was often brutal. Teachers used corporal punishment to enforce discipline, and students could be whipped for misbehavior, laziness, or even poor penmanship. The infamous dunce cap was another humiliating tool used to shame struggling students, often forcing them to stand in a corner for extended periods. Number 13. The first college in America. Had only 9 students. Harvard University, founded in 1636, was the first institution of higher education in America, but it started small. Its first graduating class in 1642 had only 9 students. The school was primarily meant to train Puritan ministers, and students were expected to learn Latin, Greek, and theology. Number 12. Slaves and free black children were often denied education. In most colonies, it was illegal to teach enslaved people how to read or write, as literacy was seen as a potential path to rebellion. Some free black children were able to attend schools, but opportunities were extremely limited. Despite these barriers, many enslaved individuals sought education in secret, often at great personal risk. Number 11. Apprenticeships were the alternative to school. For many boys, formal education ended around age 10 or 12, when they were sent to become apprentices. This hands-on training prepared them for trades such as blacksmithing, printing, or carpentry. Some apprentices were required to learn basic reading and arithmetic, but most of their education came from working alongside skilled craftsmen. Number 10. Spelling wasn't standardized. In colonial schools, there was no such thing as correct spelling. Words were often written phonetically, meaning people spelled them the way they sounded. Even educated individuals spelled the same word in multiple ways. Historical documents show that even George Washington spelled his own name differently throughout his life. It wasn't until Noah Webster's dictionary in the early 19th century that American spelling became more uniform. Number 9. Students had to make their own ink and paper. Paper and ink were expensive, so students often had to make their own. Ink was created using a mix of iron salts, tree bark, and vinegar, while paper was a precious commodity, sometimes made from old rags. Because of this scarcity, students practiced writing on slates, flat pieces of rock that could be wiped clean and reused. Number 8. Latin was more important than English. For students who attended higher levels of schooling, Latin was the primary focus, not English. Schools often required students to read and write in Latin, as it was considered the language of educated men. Even Harvard required students to be fluent in Latin before admission. English, by comparison, was viewed as secondary. Number 7. The first public school in America still exists. The first public school in America, Boston Latin School, was founded in 1635, and it's still open today. This school focused on classical education, with an emphasis on Latin, Greek, and philosophy. While it has changed over the centuries, it remains a symbol of America's early commitment to education. Number 6. Teachers were often poor and underappreciated. Colonial teachers weren't the respected professionals we think of today. Many were barely educated themselves and were paid meager salaries, sometimes receiving room and board instead of money. Schools often struggled to find teachers, leading to a rotating door of instructors with varying levels of knowledge and discipline. Number 5. Schooling wasn't free. Unlike modern public education, colonial schooling often required payment. Parents had to contribute money, food, or firewood to support the teacher. This meant that many poor families simply couldn't afford to send their children to school. Some towns provided charity schools for the less fortunate, but these were rare and often underfunded. Number 4. Teachers were paid very little. Being a teacher in colonial America was far from glamorous. Most teachers were poorly paid, often receiving room and board instead of a salary. In some cases, they had to work additional jobs, such as farming or clerking, to survive. Despite this, teaching was considered an honorable profession, especially for men who had no other means of employment. Number 3. Some schools taught in Latin. Higher education in the colonies required proficiency in Latin. So many advanced schools, known as Latin grammar schools, focused on teaching classical languages. These schools prepared boys for college, particularly if they intended to become ministers, lawyers, or scholars. English, surprisingly, was often considered a secondary subject in these institutions. Number 2. Some schools had no desks. In many early classrooms, there were no desks or chairs. Students often sat on long wooden benches or even on the floor. Writing was done on slates held in their laps. and lessons were often conducted with students standing up to recite their memorized material. Comfort was not a priority. Education was about discipline and endurance. Number 1. The first textbook was extremely strict. The New England Primer, first published in the late 1600s, was the most widely used textbook in colonial schools. It combined spelling and reading lessons with harsh religious warnings, reminding children that life was short and sin led to eternal punishment. The book contained phrases like, "In Adam's fall we sinned all," to teach the letter A, reinforcing the Puritan belief system in every lesson. And there you have it, 25 secrets of colonial American education that reveal just how different school life was back then.